what's the use of two strong legs if you only run away? And what use is the finest voice when you have nothing good to say? What good is strength and muscle if you only push and shove? And what's the use of two good ears when you can't hear those you love? It's not just what you're born with, it's what you choose to bear. And it's not how big your share is, but how much you can share. And it's not the fights you dreamed of, but those you really fought. It's not what you've been given, it's what you do with what you've got. Yeah, it's not just what you're born with, it's what you choose to bear. And it's not how big your share is, but how much you can share. And it's not the fights you dreamed of, but those you really fought. It's not what you've been given, it's what you do with what you've got.
Welcome back, friends, to Seeds of Revolution. Today, we have one of Camus Book's 2025 Micro Grant awardees, subMedia. And with us from subMedia is HeatScore. Great to have you with us, HeatScore. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, congratulations on being one of Camus's Micro Grant awardees this year.
Thank you very much. And yeah, we really appreciate it. It's great that you're doing this to support media projects and anarchist projects.
Absolutely. Community support is what our cause and what our bookstore is all about. So HeatScore, I'm wondering if you could start by telling me just a little bit about what subMedia is, how it got started, and what your all's mission is.
Sure. So subMedia is an anarchist video production collective. It's been around for in its current form as an anarchist project, it's been around for over 2 decades now. The first video that we put out was in 2004, and it was launched, or it was started by our comrade Franklin Lopez,
Mm.
who left the collective about 5 years ago.
I just interviewed Frank 2 days ago.
I saw that. Yeah, I was gonna pitch their upcoming film as well for people who
Absolutely.
haven't. They should check out that interview as well about the Red Road to the West Bank. But yeah, so it was a project that was started by Franklin Lopez. I have been involved in the project for just over 10 years. I think I was kind of had joined as an intern back in 2010, but had become a permanent collective member by 2014. And yeah, I mean, we do a variety of different content. We are, I guess, content producers in the current parlance. But we've been content producers since before that was kind of a thing. And yeah, so we do a lot of short form video content for the web, and we've put out a number of different series. So arguably the most well known is a video news series that we put out that Frank launched in 2006 called "It's the End of the World as We Know It and I Feel Fine," which was hosted by a disembodied floating head called the Stimulator. And that was how a lot of people sort of came to know subMedia. Since then, we've done another sort of short form documentary series project called Trouble. We had another brief iteration of Stimulator, came back with another show called The Fucking News, which was short lived, and then we did another news show called System Fail. We've done a couple of other different series here and there. So like introductory videos about anarchism called A is for Anarchy, and short kind of 5-minute rundowns of different examples of indigenous resistance, done in collaboration with Gord Hill. And then, yeah, our most recent project is a new series that we're working on called Into Rebellion, which is going to be a more long form documentary series. And we just recently put out the first installment in this series on the Estallido Social, the 2019 uprising in so-called Chile.
And Into Rebellion is one of the projects that you applied to Camus for the grant for, correct?
Yeah, so we applied for some funding for the second installment in the series, which is going to be on the Shutdown Canada movement, in support of the Wet'suwet'en, which I know was kind of close to home for people in so-called Victoria, where there was a lot of popular participation. So yeah, the second one is our plan is to look at that movement I mean, the series in general is looking at like the series of uprisings that took place around the world from kind of late 2018 to mid 2020, and the sort of bookends for that are the Gilets jaunes uprising in France in 2018, and then the George Floyd uprising in 2020.
And
So
I was looking at that and I was wondering why you selected those as bookends. Why 2018 to 2020?
sure, I mean that's a good question, and I think like that is something that other people have raised with us, and I think that it's fair. You could actually have a wider lens. I do think that there was sort of a period of time where there was a really intense like confluence of different uprisings that were happening all around the world. That kind of sort of began shortly before COVID, and you know, the George Floyd uprising took place a few months after COVID had been declared a global pandemic. But um, yeah, I mean, there have been other uprisings since then, and you know that you could argue that you know you could go back further and look at include things like Gezi Park or the uprising in Brazil in 2013. But for us, like this was like a period where there was like a sustained wave of global uprisings that you know shortly after uh, the Gilets jaunes uprising was the uprising in Hong Kong, and that kind of stretched out. And you know, and same with like the uprising in Chile was you know was going pretty hard for 6 months. So there was kind of a period of time when there was multiple uprisings being waged around the world, and I do think that yeah, the George Floyd uprising as an end to it, I think um, kind of made sense as a sort of closing chapter. Um, but again, yeah, like there have been, and I mean, we'll see how the series goes. It might make sense at some point to kind of extend it. And there were other uprisings that happened during the same period of time that we currently don't have plans to cover. We had sort of set a somewhat arbitrary list of 10 uprisings that happened during that period around the world that we hope to do films on. And doing these each film is a substantial amount of work. So, I mean, that's part of why we had to have a relatively narrow focus. But yeah, I mean, we would be open to including other uprisings potentially, depending on how things go. And you know, hopefully by the time we actually get through, there'll be some other uprisings that kind of make these seem irrelevant in by contrast. So we'll see.
What is the import of alternative and anarchist media when it comes to both documenting the history of, like you're talking about, global uprisings, resistance, and also covering the current events? Why is it, as I'm sure you'll agree with me, so important to approach history and contemporary action with and through an anarchist lens?
Well, I think, I mean, you know, there has been this growing disillusionment with the what is called sometimes like the legacy media or like mainstream media. And I think like the idea of journalistic like objectivity in general. And I think like for us, I mean, we've never really made any claims of objectivity. We are partisan in our analysis, and for us, it is very important that there actually be an anarchist voice covering some of these things. So when submedia first started putting out videos, there wasn't a lot of anarchist video production. I mean, there were you know some documentaries and um, you know, but there wasn't like the sort of media ecosphere wasn't what it has become today. So today there's a lot of different anarchist media projects out there. Um, but you know, and yeah, and that's great. We kind of live in this world where everyone's kind of become pretty subjective in terms of their media consumption, and so you know, a lot of people kind of just watch videos that just reinforce and shape their narratives of the world. And I mean, you know, we do think that it's important that there be anarchist narratives and you know an anarchist voice actually sharing our perspectives on events as they transpire. So, I mean, I think that that's really particularly important when it comes to these recent uprisings, which you know the state and like the power structure are you know doing their best to kind of recuperate and sweep under the rug, and sort of there's this forced kind of attempted to make people forget these uprisings. And so that was why we thought it was particularly important while the memory of these uprisings is still relatively fresh. So a lot of these are kind of celebrating their fifth anniversaries this year. So we wanted to make sure that a lot of the lessons that were learned during these uprisings are not forgotten, and that they are passed down to the next generation. All of the people who are kind of first maybe getting activated by the ongoing genocide in Gaza, for instance, or people who weren't there on the streets 5 years ago, but could still benefit from learning some of the very hard won lessons of those movements.
I know you've only completed the first episode of Into Rebellion, but I'm hopeful you can talk to us a little bit about what some of those lessons are. What can people learn from these rebellions that they can then use to help further the cause of decolonization, anti-imperialism?
Sure. So the first episode of Inter Rebellium was as I mentioned about the Essai Social in Chile. And
Can you give our listeners some background in case they haven't heard of that?
sure, yeah. So that was a national uprising uh, that was sparked in large part by a 30 peso increase or hike to the metro fare in the Greater Santiago region. And so students, like high school students, basically started a popular campaign of fare evasion and hopping the turnstiles, and having these sort of rallies and demos in the metro stations, cutting school to do it. Um, and there was a really intense police and security guards began repressing these students, and uh, it just really pissed everyone off. And there was it's estallido social in Spanish means the social explosion. And so that's essentially what it was. There was on the day and the evening of October 18th, 2019, um, riots spread all across Santiago, and the metro stations and subways and buses were all burned. Uh, and it completely paralyzed public transportation in Santiago. The governor, or the president at the time, Sebastian Pinera, initiated a curfew and brought the military out onto the streets, and that just pissed off people more. A lot of people who have pretty painful memories of the role of the military in Chilean society under Pinochet. So it really spread across the entire country, and it was a very high level of struggle for about 6 months. I mean, a very high level of struggle for about a month or 6 weeks or so. Um, and I think that, and then there was aftershocks and kind of flare ups over the next 6 months, and it was really kind of brought to a pretty abrupt end by COVID-19, and kind of a very heavy-handed like military curfew that was initiated with COVID as being like the rationale for doing so. Um, but yeah, I think the main lesson for people to take away there is just the the extent to which the state will go to recuperate uh, threats to its rule. And in this case, they offered to draft an entirely new constitution, and that was basically done to sort of split the movement. And they elected a new president, Gabriel Boric, who came up through the student movement, had rubbed shoulders with a lot of like anarchists and other people in the streets during previous waves of social uprisings in the country. And so he was sort of brought in as kind of this like new left sort of figure. One of the people we interview sort of compared it to Podemos in Spain or Syriza in Greece. And yeah, and then all of the energy that was kind of going towards building autonomous institutions of self-organization, so neighborhood associations and stuff like that, kind of got transformed into basically sort of centers for kind of drafting up the Constitution and electing people to to a constituent assembly. And so, yeah, I mean, and then ultimately, I mean, not to give too much away, spoiler alert, but yeah, the referendum for the new constitution failed, and so at the end, they were left pretty much in the same position that they were when things started out. So I think like the main lesson is just that like the state will always just attempt to initiate a dialogue if it's feels threatened, and that is something that people need to be aware of, and they need to have a plan for that going into it, because otherwise, that's where things will go. Um,
Why do you think the 2022 referendum failed after the mass unrest that you just described?
yeah, so I mean, it's a difficult question to answer, with any level of certainty, but I think like one of the big uh, influencing factors was so the there was a number of scandals around the constituent assembly. One of the biggest ones was around this one figure named uh, Pelo Valde, who was a pretty prominent activist during the Estallido Social, and so he was featured, at a lot of these big protests, and he had told everyone that he was fighting cancer, and so he cut a pretty distinct figure there. Um, Pelo Balde means like bald Valde, right? So that was kind of his nickname. Um, and so he was elected to be one of the people to draft the new constitution, and then shortly after that election, it came out that he didn't actually have cancer, and he admitted as much that had kind of been a lie to sort of you know eh, increase his popularity or whatever his reasoning was, and that did a lot to discredit the Constituent Assembly. I think also people would say that the constitution that they produced was very long and probably further left than majority of society was going to support. Um, but yeah, I mean, and then also just like it took 2 years, right? So
Yeah.
the thing is that I mean, during the George Floyd uprising, for instance, like there was a point of time where there was more than half of Americans supported burning down the third precinct in Minneapolis, and if you took that same poll 2 years later, it would have been very different, right? So I think that while these uprisings are happening, uh, there's a lot more support for uh, radical demands and kind of perspectives. And then as things kind of die back down, the sort of window shifts back towards like a more centrist position. So, I mean, that would be my 2 cents. I mean, you'd probably have to ask other people in Chile who would know more about the dynamics. But that was basically what I got from some of the interviews we did. We don't actually go into it in too much detail. Um, and then the other thing that we don't really cover in it, but is notable, is that after the defeat of the Constitution, the the government set up a new constituent assembly that was right wing, and they proposed like a right wing constitution, and it also was defeated. So I think that in part that also speaks to like increased polarization, political polarization that we're kind of seeing all over the place. But it also just kind of I think cements the idea that we try to make, or the point that we try to make, that putting your energy into coming up with a new constitution was a poor decision strategically and in hindsight for the popular movement to make.
And maybe you can then lead us into the subject of the second episode of Inter Rebellion, the Shutdown Canada movement. Tell us a little bit about what Shutdown Canada is all about.
Sure, yeah. So Shutdown Canada was like a hashtag that kind of became sort of the shorthand for a uh, movement that like a popular movement in 2020, that was launched in support of Wet'suwet'en land defenders who were fighting against the construction of a pipeline through their territory. through unceded territory in so-called BC. And so Shutdown Canada emerged as people witnessed scenes of militarized RCMP raid on their territories, and as Indigenous land defenders were peacefully attempting to defend themselves against this kind of incursion by militarized segments of the Canadian state. And it really, I think, laid bare the colonial nature of Canada, and it was supported by movements such as, in Victoria there was a massive occupation of the legislature in Victoria, the BC legislature, and then also kind of anchored by some railway blockades by Mohawk communities in Tyendinaga and Kanesatake. Um, but beyond that, there was just rallies and actions taking place across the country, and it was sort of a really, I think, pivotal moment for uh, Indigenous sovereigntist movements across Canada, and also an important moment for collaboration and solidarity between Indigenous land defenders and settler anarchist communities. So it's something that we thought, you know, again, another movement that was in part ended because of COVID, which kind of interrupted, and there was other things involved as well, but that kind of, I think, ultimately brought it to heel. But yeah, I mean, for a while, it was really demonstrating the first of all, yeah, the sheer colonial nature of the Canadian state, but also some of its vulnerabilities in terms of logistics and transportation corridors.
When you go into these spaces to film these videos, do you go in as expressly anarchist activists? When people find out you're anarchists, do they, greet you with kindness and sympathy? Does that cause people to raise an eyebrow? How do you, I guess, live and embody anarchism when you're making these movies? And what are the subject's response to that?
Yeah, I mean, submedia definitely, we pull no punches when it comes to our anarchist politics, and we are, very open, and I think our reputation precedes us in some cases. We've been doing this for a long time, and we're pretty unapologetic about our anarchist politics.
And how
Um,
do people react?
yeah, so media doesn't really pull any punches when it comes to our anarchist politics. We're pretty open and proud out there anarchists, and so and I think that we've developed a bit of a reputation for that over the years that we've been doing our work. So um, another part of Inter Rebellion, and another thing that is intentionally part of this project, is that we see it as a vehicle for collaboration with other anarchist filmmakers and other anarchist media collectives. So the first installment that we did um, with was with comrades in Chile, where we worked with like a local Chilean videographer who filmed a lot of the interviews, and we did a whole bunch of sort of co-visioning um, with anarchists there about the overall structure of the film and what they wanted to get across and who they thought would be good to interview and stuff like that. So, and I mean, we are also hoping in some places where we can to actually use this as an opportunity to sort of share some resources and maybe like get some media equipment to some of these collectives so that they can produce more anarchist propaganda, better propaganda in the future. So it is kind of like baked into this project that we do want to um, hopefully come out of this with like a increased capacity for local anarchist media production, and hopefully also just other stronger working relationships with more crews. In terms of this installment, members of submedia have been working with the Wet'suwet'en for a very long time now, for over 10 years. So that started with Franklin making contact and going out and filming at Unistoten, when sort of the camp there was first being built. Um, and yeah, we've provided a lot of like frontline media support for the Wet'suwet'en over the years and during Shutdown Canada as well. So they definitely know who we are and what we're about.
What do you think the future of anarchism looks like in Canada?
Well, I mean, that's a big question. I think, I mean, what I think that one thing I will kind of say is that we, after Shutdown Canada, a there was a period of, I think, where the actual legitimacy of the Canadian state was pretty shaken, and in that, like, I think a lot of the myths of the Canadian settler colonial project were kind of uh, laid bare by Shutdown Canada, and shortly afterwards by, you know, all the all of the information coming out about the mass graves found at the residential school sites, and you know, all of the terrible legacy of Canada's like genocidal past um, becoming like more popularly known. So I do think that, I mean, you know, there has been a period of time where, yeah, like the Canadian flag, particularly after like the trucker convoy and everything, was just sort of seen, I think, as a reactionary symbol, and it kind of had really deeply affected like the Canadian national identity. Um, I will say, I mean, I think that we are seeing like the page turn on that a little bit with the resurgence of nationalism in response to Trump's threats against Canada coming from south of the border, and this whole, you know, elbows up bullshit that you know, that is being popularized. So I do see that, yeah, we are seeing like a resurgent nationalism, which is also going to be tied with, I think, a return of kind of reaction to indigenous self determination struggles.
Mhm.
Um, and also like a big push for uh, like the pushing through of extractivist projects, and the rolling back of regulation, and kind of like this token acceptance of like indigenous self determination, um, you know, in like in the form of like paying like homily to like uh you know, like UNDRIP and like these and the reconciliation process that kind of the liberals were using to sort of salvage the and kind of recast Canada in a positive light. So I think there's going to be more of a return to sort of Canada's kind of colonial like history that before shutdown Canada. Um, and yeah, and I would imagine that anarchists will oppose this turn. I would hope, and so I mean, I anticipate seeing, you know, I mean, as climate change continues to worsen, more support for those fighting against these extractivist projects, and hopefully, yeah, hopefully increased solidarity amongst anarchists and frontline Indigenous land defenders.
It's
I
interesting.
think like it's also, I mean, it remains to be seen what will actually happen with kind of some of this jingoist rhetoric south of the border. I don't know if anything's going to come of it. I do think that, yeah, like if there were to be like an invasion or occupation by like the United States, then uh, I think probably you would see some anarchists take up kind of an anti-imperialist perspective, similar to like a lot of anarchists in Ukraine. Which would be more complicated because of Canada's colonial nature here. So I don't know. It's kind of very speculative, but those are some of the directions I could see things going.
It's interesting that you were talking about indigenous struggles for self-determination. I'm a recent immigrant, and it seems to me like that recently, and I haven't been around long enough to really have a well thought out theory, which is why I'm sort of asking you, but it seems like recently there's been a turn against recognition of indigenous sovereignty and sort of a hardening of attitudes about, you know, whether it's residential schools or indigenous land claims. Like the reactionary bent that started with the truckers convoy seems to have now crept into how people talk about and think about indigenous issues, whether it's, MPs denying that there was, you know, genocide that occurred at residential schools, or whether it's people who are denying that these nations have claims on their historic territory. Do you see that as well, as part of this reactionary shift that maybe started with COVID?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and that reactionary attitude and posture towards Indigenous people is very much like baked into the Canadian settler identity, right? And I think it is much more apparent in rural communities that are based near reserves or traditional territories where there's land reclamation actions happening. If you go to like Caledonia, for instance, there's a lot of pretty reactionary views um, towards the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, for instance, right? And I mean, I've grown up with like family members who were kind of farmers and or lived in smaller towns, and it is a pretty ubiquitous vibe in some of those communities, right? And I do think that yeah, just like there's been a push, uh, like um, like a reaction to uh, like anti-trans and like white nationalist reaction in the U.S. that in Canada that is just going to take the form of like anti-indigenous racism. It is kind of part of the national characteristics here. And so I think that was damaged by yes, by like shut down Canada um and by again the sort of the revelations of those of the residential schools. Um but but yeah, as like as the shock of uh and the shock of that attack to the legitimacy of the Canadian state wanes, you are going to see like some of these other voices get louder, and it is all wrapped up into this kind of this reactionary blowback, I think, to which is kind of unfortunately sometimes what happens when you make advances and they don't really go far enough, right?
Two
Um,
steps forward, one step back.
exactly, yeah. But I will just say, yeah, I mean, those narrative like those sentiments that you're talking about are definitely not new. I think it's more just a return to kind of the previous status quo.
So then what's the and I know you're a media company, not necessarily a philosophical think tank, but maybe answering as a media company, then what is a long-term strategy towards countering and weakening that sort of resurgent reaction?
I mean, it is a good question. I mean, I think like our role as like an anarchist media collective is to kind of um, to help shape narratives to what extent we can. But I don't think that that in and of itself is enough. I think that like people kind of make opinions about events as they're playing out, and I do think that um, when there is increased resistance being waged, and it's kind of and when we're on the offensive, that's sort of when these gains are made, right? So I do see it as sort of a bit of a battle of position, right? And for which side kind of has the element of kind of setting the pace and what have you. But I think that yeah, I mean, there is going to be resistance to some of these projects that are coming down the pike. And again, I mean, I do think that as the effects of climate change become harder and harder for people to ignore, I think that more people are going to be open to some of the things that indigenous communities have been talking about for a long time, right? About the need to rein in the excess of our sort of industrial capitalist civilization here, and to appreciate the value and some might say like the sacredness of like nature, right? Um, and yeah, I think that that sort of messaging will have more currency as like more towns are lost to like wildfires every year, um, and as we're seeing worsening climate catastrophes all around the world. So I do think that, I mean, there is going to be, the pendulum's going to swing back the other way. Um, it's just about a matter of like, yeah, what, like when that happens and what we'll be able to do and what we'll be able to save and as a civilization.
I think that's a great place to end. Heat Score, I really appreciate you being with me today on Seeds of Revolution.
Thanks a lot.
And
Thanks for having me.
our pleasure. And for those of you who'd like to follow subMedia, you can go on to their website, which is sub.media. You can also follow them on Instagram. And we're going to link to the website and Instagram in all of our show notes. So thanks again, Heat Score. Best of luck, comrade, and we wish you well.
Thanks.
If Jesus Christ came back today like you threatened he will, which poor group of people do you think that he would kill? And who would Jesus choose to starve if you gave him the chance? And if there was a genocide, would he take a neutral stance? Who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims, or the Jews? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? Would he say it's complicated and there's sinners on both sides? Or would he say that some people, they just deserve to die? If Jesus Christ rose from the dead and on a sidewalk slept, would you extend your hand to him or just watch where you stepped? Who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims, or the Jews? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? Would Jesus hate the gay folk, the queer folk, or the trans? Would he suggest they end their lives according to God's plans? Would Jesus tell a homeless man to get a fucking job, or turn his back on the poor? Would Jesus be a snob? Who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims, or the Jews? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? Would Jesus build a border wall? Would Jesus drive a tank? Would Jesus be a landlord? Would Jesus run a bank? Would Jesus Christ feel safe in his skin if he came to your town? And would you still believe in him if you found out he was brown? Who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims, or the Jews? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? Yeah, who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims,